Red and blue lights reflected off the still waters of the lake, slicing through the early morning haze. I stood barefoot on the deck of my cabin, wrapped tightly in the same blanket I had slept in, staring in disbelief as the police vehicles pulled up, sirens now quiet, and there she was, Karina, the notorious president of the HOA, standing behind them like she orchestrated the whole thing. Her arms were crossed so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together, her face twisted into a smug grin, full of triumph, as if she had finally cornered the villain in some long-winded mystery. "There she is, officers!" Karen yelled, finger extended toward me. "That's the trespasser. She broke into this property last night. This is private land, and she has no business here." The officers approached slowly, one with his hand resting on his holster. "Ma'am, we'll need to see some identification," one of them said, calm but firm. Karen's smirk grew wider. "You'll be thanking me for this later," she told them. "People like her think they can just sneak around in this neighborhood. Not on my watch." My hands were shaking as I reached into my bag, and not from fear, but from the fury simmering just beneath the surface. I was about to speak when Karen cut in again. "Don't let her fool you. She's lying. I've never seen her at any of our home meetings. She's probably some squatter who broke into the Johnsons' old place." One of the officers shot her a brief glance before turning his eyes back to me. A small crowd had started to gather on the other side of the street. Neighbors whispered, watching it all unfold like they were front row at a drama. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, "can you explain why you're here?" Before I could utter a word, Karen marched closer, finger wagging inches from my face. "She doesn't have an explanation because she doesn't belong. Arrest her." That's when I slowly pulled a key from my bag, and the key to the very cabin we stood in front of. I held it up high so there would be no mistake. The smug look on Karen's face cracked, her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed. The truth was starting to hit her, but too late. I handed over my ID. The officer studied it, his eyebrows lifting in surprise as he read the name. "You're the owner?" he asked, his tone shifting, almost respectful. Karen's jaw dropped. "Owner? That can't be right." The officer turned toward her. "Not only is she the owner, she's the newly elected chair of the HOA." Karen's expression went pale. She stumbled back a step, as if the ground had just given way beneath her. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. And that, my friends, was the beginning of Karen's downfall. But to really understand how things reached this point, you need to know what happened in the weeks leading up to that night. Hey everyone, before we rewind, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because trust me, this story, it's going to get crazy. It all began a few months ago when I, Rachel Evans, decided to take a much-needed break from the fast pace of city life. After years of grinding away, I finally inherited my family's lakeside cabin, a place packed with childhood memories and peace. Nestled at the edge of a stunning lake and surrounded by towering pines, the cabin offered a quiet escape far from the noise of modern life. I'd been planning this return for months, to breathe, to heal, to find myself again. When I arrived, the cabin was even more beautiful than I remembered. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, the old wooden deck creaked like it always had, and the scent of pine was everywhere. It felt like stepping back into a forgotten piece of myself. But one thing was different now. There was a homeowners association. Apparently, during my absence, some neighbors had formed an HOA to protect the community. And at the heart of it all, Karen Mitchell, mid-50s, precise bob haircut, and a mouth sharper than any blade. She lived for control, thrived on power, and never missed a chance to remind people of both. The first time we crossed paths, she strode up like she owned not just the lake, but the land beneath my feet. "Hi, I'm Karina, the HOA president," she said, scanning me with judgment. "You must be new around here." "I'm Rachel," I replied with a friendly smile. "Actually, I grew up in this cabin. It's been in my family for years." Her expression tightened. "Well then, you'll want to review the HOA regulations. We have clear rules: no late-night fires, no pets without permission, and no unapproved guests." I chuckled, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. From that moment, she seemed to make it her personal mission to make my life miserable. She left passive-aggressive notes on my door citing bogus violations. She claimed my non-existent dog was barking. She even threatened to report my parking in my own driveway. At first, I tried kindness. I offered her coffee when she came by to complain. I waved every morning. But the more I extended grace, the more hostile she became. The last straw came when she warned me she'd have my car towed for supposedly being too close to the road. That's when I decided enough was enough. I would attend the next home meeting and confront this nonsense head-on. That night, the meeting felt more like a royal court than a neighborhood gathering. Karen stood up front like a monarch addressing her subjects. "We have to protect our neighborhood," she declared. "There have been unfamiliar faces lurking about. It's time we tighten security." Her eyes landed on me, full of veiled accusation. The room grew uneasy. Some faces looked embarrassed. Others just stayed silent, likely afraid to speak out. I raised my hand. "With all due respect, Karine, I own my property. I don't need anyone's permission to be here." A hush fell over the room. Karen's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "Oh, Rachel. You clearly don't understand how things work around here." Oh, I understood just fine. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to let her push me around any longer. I had a plan and she had no idea what was coming. She was already plotting something worse. One evening, after a long day spent kayaking around the lake, I returned to my cabin and decided to spend the night. The sky was clear, the stars were dazzling, and the air was cool and comforting. I curled up in my blanket and drifted off to sleep on the deck, the breeze brushing softly across my skin. That peaceful moment shattered when I was jolted awake by flashing lights, wailing sirens, and Karen's voice screeching into the night, accusing me of trespassing. She had actually called the police, but when the officers confirmed who I truly was, the expression on her face was absolutely priceless. Still, that was just the beginning. Karen wasn't about to give up that easily. Even after the officers drove away and the crowd of neighbors started to disperse, I spotted her standing silently at the end of my driveway, her stare burning with hatred. She wasn't done, and neither was I. What happened next? Let's just say, things went from bad to bizarre. Later that night, just after I locked up and started settling in, I heard footsteps on the deck. Slow, intentional. I turned around expecting a neighbor, maybe even one of the officers, but number. It was Karen, and she was holding something in her hand. The porch light flickered, barely illuminating her figure. Her mouth was pressed into a tight line, and in her hand, she gripped a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, "why are you here?" She stepped forward. The boards creaked beneath her feet. "You think you are smart, don't you?" she hissed. "Humiliating me in front of the entire neighborhood, playing the hero." Her voice dripped with venom. I folded my arms. "You called the cops on the owner of this place. That was your choice." She jabbed the clipboard at me. "Not for long. I've documented every violation you've made, every single one, and believe me, the HOA will take care of it. You'll be gone within a month." I inhaled slowly, holding her gaze. I wanted to snap back, to tell her she had no authority over me, but I knew this wasn't a battle won with words. Karen was playing a longer game. Before I could speak, a sharp crack echoed from the woods nearby. Both of us turned instinctively toward the sound. The night was so quiet, the sudden noise felt like a threat. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in Karen's eyes. "You should go home," I said softly. "It's not safe out here after dark." She hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the trees, then back to me. Just for a moment, I saw fear break through that polished exterior. Then, without a word, she turned and stalked off into the shadows, muttering under her breath. As soon as she vanished, I locked the door and leaned back against it, my heart racing. I knew she wasn't finished. Karen craved control, and she would stop at nothing to reclaim it. The next morning, the lake sparkled under the rising sun, as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped, and everything felt calm again. For a moment, I sat on the deck with a cup of coffee, watching the water gently ripple. I let myself believe things might finally settle down, but that illusion didn't last long. Around noon, I noticed a group of neighbors gathering near my driveway. I could hear snippets of their conversation drifting over. "She owns it?" one woman whispered, cradling her mug. "I heard she's the new HOA chair," said another. "No way," someone else added. "Karen won't let that happen." I decided to walk over and introduce myself. "Good morning," I said with a friendly smile. They turned, clearly surprised but not unfriendly. A man in his 60s stepped forward and offered his hand. "Tom," he said, "we're glad you're here. Rachel, it's been a long time since someone gave a damn about this place." Their words meant more than they knew. As we talked, they shared story after story about how Karen had tightened her grip on the neighborhood. "She fined me for drying laundry outside," one woman said, exasperated. "She finds something wrong with everything." I nodded, listening closely. "You all deserve better than that," I said. "That's going to change." They looked at me with something I hadn't seen around here yet, a hope, and for the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel alone. But Karen wasn't about to let that slide. That evening, after a peaceful walk along the lake, something felt off as I approached the cabin. The gate lock was snapped. My pulse quickened. I stepped cautiously up the path, every sense on alert. When I reached the deck, I froze. Muddy footprints trailed right up to my front door. I opened the door carefully, bracing myself. At first, everything looked fine, but then I saw the family photo lying face down on the floor. The glass was shattered. Someone had been inside. A chill ran through me. Was it Karen? Was this her way of intimidating me? I called the sheriff. He came, took my statement, and promised they'd keep an eye on things. But I could tell he thought it was probably just a prank. Even so, I knew better. This was just the opening move in whatever game Karen was playing. That night, I checked every lock twice. I closed every curtain and kept my phone within reach. The lake was unusually still. Even the crickets seemed to have gone silent. Around midnight, I heard it. The sound of footsteps scrunching on the gravel outside. Slow, steady, getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through the blinds. My heart stopped. There she was, Karina, standing at the edge of the driveway. But this time, she wasn't alone. Two men stood behind her, both wearing dark jackets, silent and still. They stared at my cabin like predators watching their prey. Then, Karen smiled. That kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. That smile of hers said it all. Trouble was coming. Before I had a chance to react, Karen lifted her arm and pointed straight at my cabin. The two men with her immediately began walking toward my front door. I backed away from the window, heart thudding like a war drum. Who were these men? What was she planning? I barely had time to grab my phone when a bang, a deafening crash hit the door, shaking the entire cabin. The walls trembled with the impact. My hands clutched my phone as I stumbled backward, my mind racing. Outside, the pounding came again, louder, angrier. Then Karen's voice pierced the night air like a blade. "Come out, Rachel, you're breaking HOA rules by hiding in there. You don't belong here." Her voice dripped with venom, but underneath the malice, I heard something else, fear. She was trying to scare me off, desperate to regain control. With shaking fingers, I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up quickly, and I whispered my address, explaining there were men trying to break into my home. Another thunderous crash interrupted my words. The men were throwing themselves against the door now, trying to force it open. "Officers are en route," the dispatcher told me. I hung up and scanned the room for anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around the iron poker by the fireplace. I gripped it tightly, heart racing, as the door hinges creaked under the force of the assault. Then, just like that, the pounding stopped. Silence. I froze, listening. Carefully, I peeked out from behind the curtain, but they were gone. Karen and the two men had vanished into the night, their footsteps swallowed by the darkness. My whole body trembled, but I didn't run. I didn't hide. Minutes later, the familiar red and blue lights lit up the trees as the police arrived. Officers fanned out, searched the area, but came back empty-handed. One younger officer with a gentle expression pulled me aside. "Do you recognize those men?" he asked quietly. "No," I replied, my voice shaky. "But I know who sent them." He gave me a slow nod. "We'll keep a patrol in the area tonight. If anything happens, don't hesitate to call." After they left, I sat on the floor with my back to the wall, staring at the busted lock. I felt exposed and broken, but more than that, I felt furious. Karen had officially gone too far. The next morning, I took a walk into town to clear my head. The lake shimmered like glass, the sunlight calm and warm, but inside me, a storm was building. On the way home, I ran into Tom, the neighbor who had been kind from the beginning. "You all right?" he asked, noticing the exhaustion written on my face. Not exactly, I admitted. Someone tried to break into my cabin last night. His eyes widened. Karen? She was here, I nodded grimly, with 2 men. Tom's jaw clenched. She's been pulling this kind of stunt for years. But no one's ever pushed back until you. Something about that hit me deep. Maybe that's why she hated me so much. I wasn't afraid to stand up to her. Tom spent the afternoon helping me reinforce the doors and windows. A few other neighbors joined in, quietly lending tools and offering support. Their presence meant more than they knew. They were tired of being pushed around, too. For a few short hours, things felt hopeful. But peace never lasts long when Karen's involved. That evening, I made the decision to attend another home meeting. I was done being silent. The air in the room was tense the moment I stepped inside. Karen was already at the front, arms crossed, eyes boring into me like daggers. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, she sneered. The troublemaker. I ignored her and found a seat. The meeting began, and she launched straight into another tirade about neighborhood violations and supposed unauthorized changes. Thinly veiled jabs aimed directly at me. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly and looked straight at her. For the record, I said, voice steady, I'm the legal owner of my property. I have every right to be here, and I will not be intimidated, especially not by someone who rules this neighborhood through fear. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Karen's face flushed crimson. You don't know who you're messing with, she hissed. I met her glare without flinching. Actually, I do. The tension was electric. For a long second, we stood locked in silence. Then, she abruptly turned and stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. The room was still, stunned. That night, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd reached a turning point. I was wrong. Sometime after midnight, I was startled awake by the roar of engines. I jumped from bed and rushed to the window. Multiple cars were pulling into my driveway, their headlights slicing through the darkness. One of them had a trailer attached. My stomach dropped. Karen stepped out of the lead vehicle, holding a megaphone. Her voice blared across the lake. This is your final warning, Rachel. Leave now or face the consequences. Then the men from before leapt out of the other car, set tools in hand. And to my horror, they began cutting the power lines leading to my cabin. The lights flickered a broken bar, then went out, swallowing everything in thick, heavy darkness. That was the moment I realized that this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. The cabin lay in silence, save for the sound of a generator sputtering and dying outside. Only moonlight spilled through the trees, barely enough to see by. I crept toward the window, hard thudding in my chest. Outside, Karen stood there, that same wicked grin etched on her face. The 2 men were moving fast, cutting wires, smashing fixtures as she barked out commands like a field commander at war, her voice echoing through the darkness. Rip down those porch lights, and the satellite, just get rid of it, she sneered. She thinks she's untouchable? Let's see how she handles being completely cut off. My hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from pure fury. I picked up my phone again and quickly dialed 911. They're vandalizing my property, I told the dispatcher urgently. You need to send help now. Outside, one of the men climbed onto my porch, a crowbar in hand. I could hear the wood groaning as he wedged it into the frame and started prying at the door. Every crack and splinter made my stomach twist. The dispatcher reassured me officers were on the way, but I knew they wouldn't get here in time. I had to act. Silently, I crept into the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest frying pan I could find. My legs were shaking, but I held on tight. The man had just managed to wedge the door halfway open when I burst out from behind it, swinging with every ounce of strength I had. The pan slammed into him with a sharp, metallic thud. He staggered backward, shouting in pain and surprise. "Get off my property," I yelled, my voice ringing out over the chaos. The second man froze, stunned. "And Karen?" Her mouth fell open. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. "You're insane," she shrieked. "No," I growled, voice tight with resolve. "I'm just done being your target." The men looked uncertain now, clearly rattled. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of sirens rose above the treetops. Red and blue lights flickered through the forest, growing brighter with every heartbeat. Karen spun around, her mask of confidence crumbling. "Get in the car, now!" she screamed at the men. They bolted, jumping into their vehicles just as the engines roared to life. Tires screeched against gravel as they tore down the road. Karen tried to fall out, but the police arrived just in time to cut her off. 2 officers jumped out, flashlights scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" one of them demanded. Karen stumbled over her words. She was violating HOA rules. "She attacked my workers." "HOA workers?" the officer interrupted sharply. "Who are they?" Karen froze. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. The officers turned to me. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "I'm all right," I said, my voice steady. "But they tried to break into my home. They cut my power and trespassed on private property." The officer's jaw tightened. "We'll take it from here." They questioned Karen for several minutes as she tried spinning the story, saying she was trying to protect the neighborhood. But it was no use. The broken lock, severed wires, smashed fixtures, all of it told the truth. Finally, they walked her to the squad car. She didn't resist, but just as they were placing her inside, she turned to look at me. Her eyes were filled with rage. "This isn't over, Rachel. You'll regret this." A chill ran down my spine. The next morning, the lake shimmered under a pale blue sky, but the neighborhood felt different, quiet and cautious. Some neighbors stopped by, checking in on me, bringing muffins and coffee. "You really stood up to her," Tom said with a proud grin. "No one's ever had the guts." Their support warmed me more than I expected, but I couldn't relax. Karen wasn't the kind of person to walk away in defeat. People like her don't stop until they've broken everything in their path. The days that followed were eerily still. No more confrontations, no more notes on my door. It almost felt like she'd finally backed down. Almost. On the 4th evening, just as the sun vanished behind the trees, I noticed something unsettling. My new security camera wasn't working. The power had been cut. Again, I stepped cautiously onto the deck, scanning the woods beyond the cabin. The air was too quiet, still, and then I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. A flashlight beam cut briefly across the ground. Karen's voice floated on the breeze, low but unmistakable, giving commands. She was back, but she didn't come alone this time. At least 5 figures crept out of the trees, dressed in dark hooded sweatshirts. They moved silently, methodically, closing in like wolves. My phone buzzed in my hand as I called 911 yet again, but before I could finish dialing, something crashed against the window. Glass shattered. I dropped to the floor as shards scattered around me. Outside, the hooded group had fully surrounded the cabin, and then I heard her voice, cold and merciless. "Burn it down." Those words sliced through the night like a dagger. My breath caught. One of the figures pulled out a container. I could smell the gasoline even before he started shaking it. "No," I whispered, crawling toward the fireplace where I'd left the poker. My fingers closed around the handle. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. A small flame burst to life near the porch as a match was struck. Firelight danced across their faces. Karen stood behind them, her grin flickering in the glow. She was enjoying every second of it. "You should have left when you had the chance, Rachel," she shouted. The flames spread fast, crawling up the deck. Smoke thickened the air. I stumbled to my feet, coughing, eyes stinging. The cabin was surrounded, every window blocked. Their shadows moved like specters, pressing closer. I bolted for the kitchen, grabbing the fire extinguisher I'd stored there just in case. I yanked the pin and sprayed foam over the growing flames, pushing the attackers back just enough to catch a breath. "Call the police," I screamed, hoping a neighbor might hear me. My phone was lying on the floor, the screen cracked and dark from earlier. Outside, the group began circling the cabin again. Karen's face twisted with fury. "Don't just stand there, finish it," she shrieked. But before they could move again, sirens howled in the distance. Flashing lights began to pierce the woods once more. Karen's head snapped toward the sound of the approaching sirens. "Scatter," she hissed. The hooded figures vanished into the woods like shadows melting into darkness. Karen spun around to flee, but the slippery foam from the extinguisher betrayed her. She lost her footing and slammed into the ground. She scrambled up, panic in her eyes, just as the first patrol car skidded into my driveway. Officers leapt out, weapons drawn, hands in the air. One barked. Karen froze, chest heaving, her gaze darting wildly like a trapped animal. Slowly, she raised her hands, hatred etched into every line of her face. The officers moved in quickly and cuffed her without hesitation. "You're being arrested for arson, attempted assault, and unlawful trespassing," one of them said firmly. "This isn't over," Karen screamed as they dragged her to the cruiser. "You'll regret this, Rachel, I swear it." I stood on the porch, shaking, the acrid stench of smoke clinging to my skin. Around us, windows lit up, neighbors peeked out, their faces pale, awash in the strobing red and blue lights. I allowed myself a brief moment to hope it might finally be over. The days that followed were quiet again, but this time the silence was heavy. The fire had left black scorch marks across my deck, a grim reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. But the community didn't let me face it alone. Tom showed up, followed by others, bringing food, tools, and encouragement. They helped clean up what they could. "You're the strongest person here," one woman said gently, handing me a basket of muffins. I gave her a grateful smile, but inside I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen didn't just disappear. They slipped through cracks. And 3 days later, my fears were confirmed. I was sipping coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed. It was a message from the sheriff's office. Karen had posted bail. My stomach sank. I looked out at the calm lake, but inside me, a storm was gathering. That night, I made sure every door and window was locked, every motion sensor activated. The fire extinguisher stayed within arm's reach. Around midnight, the low hum of an engine caught my attention. I peeked through the curtains and saw a black SUV idling at the edge of my driveway, lights off. I couldn't see who was inside, but I could feel the stare. An hour passed. The vehicle didn't move. I stayed still, fingers clenched around the fireplace poker like a weapon. Finally, the SUV rolled away, swallowed by the night. The next morning, I found a single sheet of paper nailed to my front door. Scrawled in red marker were 4 words: "You will lose everything." My hands trembled as I crumpled it. That evening, I'd had enough. I called my lawyer and told him everything, every violation, every threat, every attack. He listened without interrupting, then finally said, "Rachel, it's time to take the HOA down." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. We got to work off photos, recordings of threats, statements from neighbors. Piece by piece, the case came together. Karen and her corrupt HOA had left a long trail, but just as things started to feel safe again, the nightmare returned. 2 nights later, a loud crash yanked me from sleep. The sharp stench of gasoline filled the air. I ran to the window and froze. A flaming trail snaked across my driveway, leading straight to the house. At the end of it stood Karen, a lit flare in her hand, her face twisted into a wicked smile. Then she let it fall. The flare tumbled through the air and landed with a burst of fire. Flames surged down the trail like a living thing. The heat hit the window almost instantly. "No!" I screamed, grabbing the extinguisher. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Barefoot, I sprinted outside, spraying the fire as it rushed toward me. The foam hissed against the heat, smoke burning my eyes. Behind the flames, Karen stood watching, her laughter rising above the chaos. "You can't stop this, Rachel, you can't stop me." Then, 2 more figures emerged from the trees, hooded. Each hurled Molotov cocktails onto the lawn. They exploded in fireballs that lit up the sky. I was surrounded. But before I could even process it, blinding headlights swung into the driveway. A truck barreled in, horn blaring. It was Tom. He jumped out, extinguisher in hand, and charged toward the flames. "Back up, Rachel!" he shouted, spraying foam across the growing blaze. The hooded attackers faltered. "Drop it!" Tom barked, eyes blazing. Karen's face twisted with rage. "You traitor!" she screamed. "You were supposed to stay out of this." Tom stepped forward. "You've tormented this neighborhood long enough. It ends tonight." She opened her mouth to reply, but then the sirens hit. Louder, closer. Karen's eyes widened with alarm. She tried to flee, but Tom grabbed her wrist. It was just long enough. Police cars skidded into view, and officers leapt out, shouting commands. The hooded figures scattered into the woods, but Karen didn't escape this time. She kicked and screamed, but they tackled her and cuffed her right there in the dirt. "This time," the sheriff said, staring down at her, You're not walking away." By the time the fire was extinguished, my yard was charred, the porch scorched, and I was left trembling, adrenaline flooding my veins. Officers stayed with me until dawn, collecting statements, documenting everything. They said the evidence was finally enough to keep Karen behind bars for a very long time. I wanted to believe them. That morning, the neighborhood came together to help clear the aftermath. Some arrived with breakfast in hand, others with tools, and many with kind words that lifted my weary spirit. The solidarity around me was unexpected and deeply moving. For the first time, I felt like I was truly part of something, and not because of any rules or regulations, but because of real, human connection. "We're standing with you, Rachel," one neighbor said firmly. "This place doesn't belong to Karen, it's yours." Their encouragement lit a fire inside me. Alongside my lawyer, I filed restraining orders and began the legal process of dismantling the toxic HOA leadership. Slowly but surely, the foundation Karen had built began to crack. In the days that followed, life began to resemble something close to normal. The lake sparkled again beneath clear skies. Birds chirped in the trees. I could breathe, almost. But deep inside, I knew better. Karen wasn't Donian, not by a long shot. People like her don't give up from behind bars. I was proven right on a stormy night. Exactly 1 week later, thunder rolled across the water as I sat on the porch sipping hot tea, wrapped in a blanket. A gust of wind howled, rattling the windows and setting my nerves on edge. Just as I stood to head back inside, I noticed something move near the tree line. My stomach clenched. A tall, broad figure stepped out of the shadows. He wore a hood. Then 3 others emerged behind him, each holding something glinting in the dim light: crowbars, chains, tools. The largest one spoke in a gravelly voice. "Karen sends her regards." Before I could react, they rushed toward the cabin. A loud crack split the air as the first blow from a crowbar shattered the porch railing. Rain fell in sheets, mixing with the sheer panic I felt. I stumbled back inside and slammed the door shut, locking it as fast as I could. They pounded on the wood with heavy fists, barking threats I couldn't fully hear over the thunder. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the storm had taken the signal. Static, nothing. I backed into a corner, clutching the fireplace poker like a weapon, my breath shaky. The door cracked under pressure, then splintered. A hand forced its way through the opening, clawing at the latch. And then a boom. A flash of blinding light lit up the yard. For a second, I thought it was lightning until I heard the roar of an engine. Tom struck again, but this time, he hadn't come alone. Half the neighborhood followed behind him, headlights blazing. Their voices rang out, full of fury and resolve, as they charged toward the intruders. The men froze, momentarily caught off guard by the crowd. Then, one by one, they bolted into the woods, swallowed by the storm. Soaking wet but undeterred, my neighbors gathered on the porch beside me. I looked around at their determined faces and realized that this wasn't just my fight anymore. They were in it with me. But I also knew Karen wasn't finished, not yet. The following morning, after the clouds had cleared and the rain subsided, a package arrived at my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was a single scorched piece of wood, a part of my destroyed porch, wrapped in a note that read, "This was just a warning. Next time, it won't be the porch." My hands trembled as I held the note. It was a message, clear and chilling. Somehow, even from confinement, Karen was pulling the strings. I took a deep breath and stood tall. I was done being afraid. That morning, I called my lawyer again. "It's time," I told him. "I want to take down the entire HOA for good." He agreed. Together, we compiled every shred of evidence: photos of the destruction, voice recordings of Karen's threats, official reports, and statements from nearly every neighbor. The case was airtight. Still, I braced myself. Karen wouldn't go down without a final fight. 2 days later, the court date was set. It would take place in the town courthouse, and nearly the entire neighborhood vowed to attend. Tom placed a steady hand on my shoulder and said, "You're not walking in there alone." The night before the hearing, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak, every rustle outside made me jump. I left the lights on and stayed fully dressed, my phone in hand. Around 2 a.m., I heard slow, deliberate footsteps outside. I crept to the window and peeked out. There, At the edge of the driveway stood Karen. Somehow, she was out. Her appearance was gaunt, her hair tangled, but her eyes glowed with the same venomous intensity. She raised one hand slowly and waved mocking me before vanishing into the forest. By the time morning broke, I was running on nerves and caffeine. Tom pulled up and we drove to the courthouse, a caravan of neighbors trailing behind us in support. Karen was already there, flanked by her attorney. That smug smirk never left her face, as if she believed she still had the upper hand. The hearing began. My lawyer laid out every incident in brutal clarity of photos, police records, witness accounts. One by one, the neighbors testified, their voices steady as they recounted years of fear and harassment. Karen's lawyer tried to twist it all, claiming she was the real victim, but the evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom saw through the act. When it was my turn, I stood tall and spoke from the heart. She's not just a bad neighbor. She's dangerous. She tried to burn my house down. She's sent people to hurt me. She's bullied and controlled this entire community for years. Enough is enough. The judge remained silent, thoughtful. Then it was Karen's turn. She exploded, accusing everyone in the courtroom of conspiring against her. Her anger only made her seem more unstable. At last, the judge gave his ruling. The HOA would be immediately dissolved. Karen was stripped of all authority, fined for the extensive damages, and sentenced to prison for arson, assault, and conspiracy. Relief rippled through the room. Some people cheered, others wept. Tom clapped my back, grinning. You did it, Rachel, you finally won. But just before she was led away in cuffs, Karen turned and locked eyes with me. Her smile was sharp and venomous. This isn't over, she hissed. For weeks afterward, the calm returned. The lake glistened, the neighborhood healed. I finally felt safe. But I never forgot that smile. And I knew Karen wasn't through yet. The porch had been repaired, the lawn was lush and green again, and the laughter of neighbors filled the air where tension once lingered. Yet deep inside, I couldn't shake the echo of Karen's final words. People like her don't simply vanish if they wait. They plan, they strike when the world stops watching. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the lake, casting amber light over the water, a knock sounded at my door. I hesitated, then slowly opened it. No one was there, just an envelope, resting silently on the porch. Inside, I found a photograph of me, taken from the woods. It was recent. On the back, in the same ominous red ink as before, were the chilling words, "You may have won the battle, Rachel, but the war has only begun." A gust of wind swept through the trees, sending a cold shiver down my spine. In that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something darker. The photo haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself on that porch, unaware of the eyes watching me from the shadows. Karen was in prison, or so I thought. But her influence stretched far beyond those bars. The following days were uneasy. I tried to stay calm for the sake of the neighbors, who believed the storm had passed. I wished I could believe that too. Then came the call from the sheriff. His voice was tight with tension. "Rachel, you need to know Karen escaped during a prison transfer." My knees nearly buckled. "How?" I whispered. "She had help. We believe she's still nearby. Stay alert." As I ended the call, a deep dread settled in. The sun was beginning to set again, and for the first time in weeks, the lake felt menacing. That night, sleep was impossible. I left every light on, locked every door, and paced with the fireplace poker gripped tightly in hand. Even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard it, a soft crunch of gravel shifting under footsteps. I crept to the window, heart pounding. There she was, Karen, standing at the edge of the driveway. Her appearance was ragged, a clothes torn, hair wild, but her eyes blazed with hatred. She wasn't smiling now. Her face was twisted in raw fury. "You ruined me," she growled, her voice slicing through the night. "Now I'll ruin you just like you ruined me." Before I could move, something glinted in her hand, a gun. I dove behind the wall just as the first shot shattered the front window. Glass exploded everywhere. Another shot tore through the siding. "Come out!" she screamed. "Face me!" Frantically, I crawled to the back door and slipped out, circling the cabin through the trees. Karen burst inside, gun raised, stalking room to room. "You can't hide forever, Rachel!" she shouted. I crept behind her, silent as the wind, gripping the poker. My breath was shallow, my hands were shaking. Then I struck. The poker slammed into her arm. The gun clattered to the floor as she shrieked. She spun around, full of rage, and we struggled, smashing furniture, toppling lamps. "You don't belong here!" she screamed. "This is my home!" I shouted back, slamming her into the wall. "Not anymore!" Suddenly, the door burst open. My neighbors charged in. Tom at the front, wielding a baseball bat. Karen lunged for the gun, but Tom tackled her before she could reach it, holding her down until the police stormed in. As they hauled her away, she writhed and screamed, "This isn't over, Rachel. I'll be back, you'll see." The sheriff looked at me with a hard expression. "Not this time. She won't be getting out again." The cabin was a wreck, but I was still breathing. The neighbors stayed until dawn, standing by me through the wreckage and fear. The lake shimmered in the morning light, as though trying to wash away the memory of the night before. In the weeks that followed, Karen was transferred to a maximum security facility, hundreds of miles away. The HOA was gone for good. The neighborhood was free. Peace returned. One morning, I stood on my newly rebuilt porch, looking out over the calm waters. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. The weight of Karen's shadow no longer loomed over me. I could finally breathe again. And as the breeze whispered through the tall pines, I understood something deep and true. Sometimes the darkest battles reveal the strongest parts of who we are. This was my home, and no Olney and not even Karina would ever take it from me again.